Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because I woke up with a head full of cotton and a mouth that tasted like I'd been licking the bottom of an ashtray. The sunlight streaming through the gaps in my bedroom curtains felt like daggers to my eyes. I groaned, rolling over to check the time on my phone. 11:47 a.m. Jesus Christ. Never again, I muttered, the same lie I told myself every time I overindulged. My temples throbbed as I sat up, the room spinning slightly. I needed water, aspirin, and about 12 more hours of sleep. As I stumbled to the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. Something different. Something wrong. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned to look out the window. The cemetery across the street had always been there, a constant reminder of mortality that I'd grown used to ignoring. The large angel statue at its entrance was a familiar sight, its back always turned to my house as it faced the graveyard, watching over the dead. But not today. Today it was staring right at me. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. "Get it together, Jack," I said to myself, my voice raspy from dehydration and too many cigarettes. "You're still drunk, that's all." I splashed cold water on my face and popped a couple of aspirin, chasing them down with tap water. When I looked in the mirror, a haggard face stared back at me. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, stubble on my chin, hair sticking up in all directions. I looked like death warmed over. Fitting, considering the view. I shuffled back to the bedroom, drawn to the window like a moth to flame. The statue hadn't moved. It still stared at my house, its blank stone eyes seeming to bore into me. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, yanking the curtains closed. But even with the heavy fabric blocking the view, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to go about my day, nursing my hangover with coffee and greasy food. But every few minutes, I found myself peeking through the curtains, half expecting the statue to be gone. It never was. As afternoon bled into evening, my phone buzzed. It was my buddy, Mike. "Hey, jackass." His voice crackled through the speaker. "You alive after last night?" I grunted in response. "Barely. What the hell was in those drinks?" Mike laughed. "Nothing out of the ordinary. You're just getting old, man. Listen, we're hitting O'Malley's again tonight. You in?" I glanced at the window, the curtains still drawn tight. "I don't know, Mike, I'm not feeling great." "Come on, hair of the dog, it'll fix you right up." I hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, all right. Give me an hour." As I hung up, a flicker of movement caught my eye. The curtain had shifted slightly, a thin sliver of the outside world visible. And there, in that narrow gap, was a single stone eye staring directly at me. I jerked back, my heart pounding. This was insane. Statues don't move. They don't change position. And they certainly don't follow you with their eyes. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, then yanked the curtains open. The angel stood exactly where it had been that morning, its gaze fixed on my house. But now, as the sun began to set, its shadow stretched across my lawn like a long, dark finger, pointing accusingly at my front door. A chill ran down my spine and I quickly closed the curtains again. I needed to get out of here. Maybe Mike was right. Maybe I just needed a drink to calm my nerves. I showered and dressed quickly, pointedly avoiding looking out any windows. As I headed for the front door, keys in hand, I paused. Something felt off. The house was too quiet, the air too still. I slowly turned around, my eyes drawn to the window beside the door. The curtain there was open, offering a clear view of my front yard and the cemetery beyond. The statue was gone. For a moment, relief washed over me. "See," I told myself. "You were imagining things. Probably just some kids playing a prank, moving it around." But then I saw it. At the very edge of my property, barely visible in the growing darkness, stood the angel. It was closer now, much closer than it had been before, and although I couldn't make out its features in the dim light, I knew it was still watching me. My phone buzzed again, making me jump. It was Mike. "Hey, where are you? We're waiting." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Mike," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I can make it tonight." "What? Why not?" I stared out the window, unable to look away from the silhouette at the edge of my yard. "You're going to think I'm crazy, but there's this statue from the cemetery. I think it's following me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Mike burst out laughing. "Jesus, Jack, how much did you drink last night? You're having some wild hallucinations, man." "I'm serious, Mike. It's moved. It's watching me." Mike's laughter died down, replaced by concern. "Jack, listen to me. You're freaking yourself out over nothing. It's just a statue. It can't move, and it sure as hell can't follow you. You probably just never noticed it before, and now your hungover brain is playing tricks on you." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But as I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, I saw the shadow in my yard move. Just slightly. Just enough. "Mike," I said, my voice shaking. "I gotta go. I'll call you tomorrow." I hung up before he could respond, my eyes never leaving the window. The statue was motionless again, but I knew what I'd seen. It had moved. It was getting closer. With trembling hands, I locked the front door. Then I went through the house, checking every lock, closing every curtain. By the time I finished, my heart was racing, and sweat beaded on my forehead. I ended up in my bedroom, huddled on the bed with all the lights on. Sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. As the night wore on, I found myself drifting despite my fear. My eyelids grew heavy, my thoughts fuzzy. Just as I was about to succumb to exhaustion, a sound jolted me fully awake. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from outside, the sound of stone dragging across the earth. I held my breath, straining to listen. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, scrape, scrape, scrape. Closer now. Much closer. I wanted to look. I needed to know. But terror kept me frozen in place, unable to move, barely able to breathe. The scraping stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Then, softly at first, but growing louder, came a new sound. Tap, tap, tap. Stone fingers on my bedroom window. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the covers over my head like a child hiding from the monster in the closet. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that no blanket could protect me from what was out there. As I lay there shaking, a single thought echoed in my mind. This is only the beginning. The morning sun cut through the fog that clung to the cemetery like a shroud, casting long shadows across the weathered gravestones. I stood at the wrought iron gates, my hands trembling slightly as I pushed them open. The creak of rusted metal seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Get a grip, Jack," I muttered to myself, stepping onto the path that wound through the sea of markers. My eyes were fixed on the angel statue at the center of the cemetery, its back turned to me once again. As I approached, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the memory of last night. The tapping on my window, the scraping sounds. But in the harsh light of day, it all seemed absurd, impossible. I circled the statue, studying every inch of its weathered surface. There were no marks in the grass around it, no sign it had ever moved. Its unseeing eyes stared off into the distance, ignoring me completely. A bubble of laughter escaped my lips, tinged with hysteria. "You're losing it, old boy," I said, running a hand through my hair, jumping at shadows like a kid afraid of the dark. "Can I help you with something, sir?" The voice made me jump, and I spun around to find an older man watching me. He wore the uniform of a groundskeeper, his lined face set in a frown of suspicion. I was just looking, I stammered, suddenly feeling foolish. The caretaker's eyes narrowed. This statue's been here for over 100 years. Ain't nothing special about it. I nodded, trying to appear nonchalant. Of course. I thought I saw it move yesterday. Silly, right? The old man's expression didn't change. Statues don't move, mister. Maybe you ought to lay off the sauce. Heat crept up my neck. Whoa. I'm not drunk, I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. Sorry. I've just been under a lot of stress lately. Seeing things, I guess. The caretaker grunted, clearly unimpressed. Well, see it somewhere else. This is a place of rest, not a tourist attraction. I mumbled an apology and turned to leave, but something made me pause. Has anyone ever reported anything strange about this statue before? The old man was silent for a long moment, his rheumy eyes studying me intently. Finally he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. Folks see all sorts of things they can't explain. Grief does funny things to the mind. But that angel there? It's just stone. Nothing more, nothing less. I nodded, not entirely convinced but eager to escape his scrutiny. As I walked back to the gates, I could feel his gaze boring into my back. Once home, I tried to put the whole incident out of my mind. I threw myself into work, answering emails and making calls I'd been putting off. But as the day wore on, I found my eyes constantly drawn to the window. The statue stood where it always had, its back to my house. I breathed a sigh of relief every time I looked, telling myself I'd imagined the whole thing. As evening approached, I decided to call Mike and apologize for my behavior the night before. Hey man, I said when he picked up, about last night. Jack, Jesus, I was worried about you. You sounded pretty messed up. I forced a laugh. Yeah, sorry about that. I think I was still half drunk or something. Seeing things that weren't there, you know? Mike chuckled. Well, as long as you're feeling better now. You want to grab a beer later? Promise I won't let you overdo it this time. I hesitated, glancing at the window. The statue hadn't moved. Maybe another night. I've got a lot of work to catch up on. All right, but don't be a stranger. And lay off the hard stuff for a while, yeah? After we hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It had all been in my head. Too much booze, too much stress, and an overactive imagination. Nothing more. I decided to reward myself with a quick shower before diving back into work. As the hot water washed over me, I felt the last of my tension melt away. By the time I stepped out, wrapped in a towel, I was almost feeling like myself again. That's when I saw it. Through the bathroom window, partially obscured by steam, I could see the cemetery. And there, unmistakable even at this distance, was the angel statue. It had turned, its blank eyes now staring directly at my house. The towel slipped from my nerveless fingers as I stumbled backward, my heart leaping into my throat. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible. I ran to my bedroom, fumbling for my phone with shaking hands. I had to call someone, tell them what was happening. But who would believe me? As I stared at the screen, trying to decide what to do, a shadow fell across the room. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I raised my eyes to the window. The statue was there, at the edge of my property, closer than it had ever been before. Its stone face was twisted into a grotesque smile, its arms outstretched as if reaching for me. A scream built in my throat, but before it could escape, the statue vanished. In the blink of an eye, it was back in the cemetery, its back turned once more as if it had never moved. I sank to the floor, my legs unable to support me any longer. This was real. It was all real, and I was losing my mind. With trembling hands, I reached for the bottle of whiskey I kept in my nightstand. I didn't bother with a glass, taking long swigs directly from the bottle. The burn of alcohol did nothing to calm the terror that gripped me, but I kept drinking anyway. As the room began to spin, I curled up on the floor, the bottle clutched to my chest like a lifeline. Tears streamed down my face as I stared at the window, waiting for the statue to appear again. Please. I whispered to the empty room, my voice cracking. Please let this all be a bad dream. But as consciousness slipped away, dragged under by the whiskey and exhaustion, I knew in my heart that this nightmare was only beginning. The angel was watching, waiting, and sooner or later, it would come for me. The days blurred together in a haze of fear and sleepless nights. I couldn't eat, couldn't work, couldn't think about anything except the angel statue and its inexorable approach. Each morning I'd steel myself to look out the window, dreading what I might see. And each morning it was closer. At first the changes were subtle, a few inches here, a foot there. But as the days wore on, its progress became undeniable. The statue was no longer content to remain in the cemetery. It was coming for me. I started taking photos, my hands trembling as I tried to hold the camera steady. Click. The angel at the cemetery gates. Click. The angel at the edge of the sidewalk. Click. The angel on my neighbor's lawn. I spread the photos out on my kitchen table, arranging them chronologically. The evidence was there, clear as day. But would anyone believe me? I had to try. I called Mike first, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. Mike, I swear to God, it's moving. I have proof. Photos. You have to come see. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mike finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Jack, buddy, are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should talk to someone. A professional, I mean. I'm not crazy, I shouted, immediately regretting my outburst. More calmly, I added, just, please, come over, look at the photos. You'll see. Mike agreed, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. When he arrived an hour later, his face was a mask of concern. I laid out the photos, explaining each one in detail. Mike listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. Jack, he said gently, these all look the same to me. The statue hasn't moved. What? No, look closer, here. And here. I pointed frantically at the images. It's clearly in different positions. Mike put a hand on my shoulder. I think you might be seeing what you want to see, man. You haven't been sleeping well, right? Stress can do funny things to your mind. I shrugged off his hand, anger and frustration boiling up inside me. I'm not imagining this, Mike. It's real. It's happening. Okay, he said, holding up his hands in surrender. Let's say it is moving. What do you think it wants? I deflated, sinking into a chair. I don't know, but it's coming for me. I can feel it. Mike stayed for a while longer, trying to calm me down. He suggested I take a vacation, get out of town for a bit, clear my head. I nodded along, but we both knew I wouldn't go anywhere. I couldn't leave. What if it followed me? After Mike left, I paced the house, checking and rechecking the locks. I drew all the curtains, unable to bear the sight of the statue's steady approach. But even with the windows covered, I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to find rest. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sent my heart racing. I must have dozed off eventually because suddenly I was jolted awake by a sound. Scrape. 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 The unmistakable sound of stone dragging across earth. I lay frozen in my bed, ears straining in the darkness. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. Scrape. 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 It was just outside my window now. I could hear the rasp of stone against glass, as if marble fingers were tracing patterns on the pane. I wanted to look. I needed to see. But terror kept me paralyzed. My eyes squeezed shut as I silently prayed for it to go away. The scraping stopped. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, softly at first but growing louder, came a new sound. Tap. 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 I bit down on my fist to keep from screaming. The tapping continued, insistent, demanding. It wanted me to look. It wanted me to see. With a Herculean effort, I forced myself to turn my head. My eyes cracked open, adjusting to the darkness. The window was empty. The yard beyond was still. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. It had just been a dream, a nightmare born of stress and paranoia. But as I started to relax, movement caught my eye. There, at the very edge of my vision, a flash of white. I turned my head slowly, dread building in my stomach. The angel stood in the corner of my room, motionless, its blank eyes fixed on me. I screamed then, a primal sound of pure terror. I scrambled out of bed, tripping over tangled sheets in my haste to get away. I hit the light switch, flooding the room with harsh brightness. The corner was empty. I sank to the floor, my legs unable to support me. Tears streamed down my face as I gasped for air, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. "It's not real," I whispered, rocking back and forth. "It's not real. It's not real." But I knew it was. The angel was coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. From that night on, I avoided windows like the plague. I covered every reflective surface in the house, unable to shake the feeling that I might see that stone face staring back at me. I lived in a self-imposed darkness, jumping at every sound, flinching at every shadow. My friends tried to intervene. They came by, individually and in groups, all wearing the same expression of worry and pity. They talked about stress, about burnout, about the need for professional help. I nodded along, agreeing to whatever they suggested, if only to make them leave faster. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. None of them had seen what I'd seen. None of them knew the terror of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. One afternoon, a knock at the door startled me from my vigil. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. It was Sarah, my next-door neighbor. I opened the door a crack, careful not to expose myself too much. "Hey, Sarah, what's up?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Jack. I just wanted to check on you. We haven't seen you around much lately, and, well, there've been some strange noises coming from your house at night." My blood ran cold. "What kind of noises?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Like scraping and tapping. I thought maybe you were doing some late-night renovations or something." I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Oh yeah, just some minor repairs. Nothing to worry about." She didn't look convinced. "Jack, are you sure you're okay? You look, well, you don't look great." "I'm fine," I said too quickly. "Just been working a lot, thanks for checking in though." I closed the door before she could say anything else, my mind racing. The sounds were real. Other people could hear them, which meant I ran to the window, yanking back the curtain for the first time in days. The angel stood at the edge of my property, closer than ever before. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, its head slowly turned to face me. I let the curtain fall, stumbling backward. This couldn't go on. I couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to be done. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, trying to decide who to call. The police? They'd never believe me. A priest? What could they do against a statue? In the end, I called the one person who might have answers, the cemetery caretaker. As the phone rang, I glanced nervously at the covered windows. The sun was setting, painting the room in shades of red and gold. Night was coming. The next morning, I woke with a determination that bordered on madness. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to get them. I threw on some clothes, not bothering to shower or shave. My reflection in the mirror showed a man on the edge. Wild-eyed, disheveled, barely recognizable as the person I'd been just weeks ago. I didn't care. Appearances meant nothing in the face of the terror that had consumed my life. The drive to the cemetery was a blur. I barely registered the other cars on the road, my mind fixated on the confrontation to come. As I pulled into the small parking lot beside the cemetery office, I caught a glimpse of the angel statue in my rearview mirror. It stood where it always had, at the entrance to the graveyard, its back turned to me once more. But I knew better now. I knew what it was capable of. I stormed into the office, the bell above the door jangling discordantly. The caretaker looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his weathered features before settling into a mask of calm indifference. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice level. "You know damn well why I'm here," I snarled, slamming my hands down on his desk. "The statue, the angel. It's moving. It's coming for me, and I think you know why." The old man's expression didn't change. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. The statue hasn't moved. It's been in the same place for over a century." His calm denial only fueled my rage. "Don't lie to me. I've seen it move. I've got pictures. It's been coming closer to my house every night. You have to know something about it." The caretaker stood slowly, his roomy eyes never leaving mine. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but I can assure you there's nothing unusual about that statue. Perhaps you should speak to someone about these delusions." "Delusions?" I laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. "You think I'm making this up? That I'm crazy? I know what I've seen. That thing is alive and it's after me. And I think you know why." For a moment, something flickered in the old man's eyes. Fear? Recognition? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a steely resolve. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a place of peace and respect for the dead. I won't have you disturbing that with these wild accusations." I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a whisper. "What are you hiding? What do you know about that statue?" The caretaker's face hardened. "I know that it's just a piece of stone, nothing more. And I know that you need help, son. Professional help. Now please leave before I'm forced to call the authorities." I opened my mouth to argue further, but the look in his eyes told me it would be useless. With a frustrated growl, I turned and stormed out of the office. As I walked back to my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Slowly, I turned to look at the angel statue. Its head had moved, just slightly, but enough that its blank eyes now seemed to be staring directly at me. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to unlock the door. As I slid into the driver's seat, I risked one last glance at the statue. It had returned to its original position, facing away from me as if it had never moved at all. The drive home was a nightmare. Every shadow seemed to be reaching for me. Every glint of sunlight on stone made me flinch. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was a wreck. I spent the rest of the day pacing my house, alternating between rage at the caretaker's denial and paralyzing fear of what might come with nightfall. As the sun began to set, I found myself standing at the window, staring out at the cemetery in the distance. The statue stood where it always had, motionless in the fading light. But I knew better now. I knew what it was capable of. Exhaustion eventually overtook me, and I fell into a fitful sleep. That's when the dream began. I was standing in the cemetery, surrounded by a thick fog that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. The gravestones around me were weathered and crumbling, their inscriptions long since faded away. And there, in the center of it all, stood the angel statue. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, it began to move. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, it approached me. Its stone wings unfurled, stretching out to block any escape. Its face, once blank and expressionless, now wore a grotesque smile that promised untold horrors. I tried to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. All I could do was watch as the statue drew closer and closer. Its cold marble hands reached for me, wrapping around my throat with inexorable strength. I could feel the life being squeezed out of me, my vision darkening at the edges. Just as I thought it was all over, I woke up with a start, gasping for air. My room was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of my alarm clock. 3:17 a.m., the witching hour. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I became aware of a presence in the room. Something was different. Something was wrong. With trembling hands, I reached for the lamp on my bedside table. As light flooded the room, I let out a sigh of relief. Everything seemed normal. No statue looming over my bed, no marble hands reaching for my throat. But as I went to turn off the lamp, something caught my eye. There, on the doorknob of my bedroom door, were several dusty white fingerprints. My blood ran cold as I stared at those impossible marks. They looked like they had been made by someone, or something, with hands caked in stone dust. I scrambled out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a trick of the light, or my imagination running wild. But as I approached the door, there was no denying what I saw. The fingerprints were real, tangible evidence that something had been in my room while I slept. With shaking hands, I touched one of the prints. A fine white powder came away on my fingertips. I brought it to my nose, inhaling deeply. The scent of old stone and decay filled my nostrils. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This was real. All of it was real. The statue had been here, in my room, while I slept. It had touched my door, perhaps stood over my bed, watching me with those blank stone eyes. As the reality of my situation crashed down upon me, I felt something inside me break. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest, quickly turning into racking sobs. I sank to the floor, my back against the bed, and stared at those damning fingerprints on my doorknob. They were proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined everything. But they were also proof that I was in far more danger than I had ever realized. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here anymore. I had to leave, to run as far and as fast as I could. But even as I began to plan my escape, a part of me knew it was futile. The angel had found its way into my home, into my very bedroom. No matter where I went, it would follow. And sooner or later, it would catch me. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when I bolted out of my house, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. I raced across the street to the cemetery, my eyes fixed on the entrance where the angel statue had stood for as long as I could remember. It was gone. I skidded to a halt, my breath caught in my throat. Where the imposing figure had once stood, there was nothing but a bare pedestal. Chunks of crumbled stone littered the ground around it, as if the statue had simply disintegrated overnight. No, 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 I muttered, running my hands through my hair. This was worse than I could have imagined. If it wasn't here, where was it? I began to search the cemetery frantically, darting between gravestones and mausoleums. My eyes scanned every shadow, every corner, looking for any sign of the angel. As I searched, I became aware of the stares of the few early morning mourners. They watched me with a mixture of confusion and concern, but I didn't care. I had to find it. "Hey, you there!" a gruff voice called out. I spun around to see the caretaker striding towards me, his face set in a scowl. "What do you think you're doing?" "The statue," I gasped, pointing at the empty pedestal. "It's gone." "Where is it?" The old man's eyes narrowed. "I told you yesterday there's nothing special about that statue. Now I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to leave. You're disturbing the peace." I grabbed his arm, desperation overriding any sense of propriety. "Please, you have to believe me. It's been moving, coming closer to my house every night. And now it's gone. Don't you understand what that means?" The caretaker jerked his arm away, but not before I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear? Recognition? Whatever it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold anger. "I'm warning you," he growled. "Leave now, or I'm calling the police. This is a place of rest, not a playground for your delusions." I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me. There was something there, something hidden beneath the anger and annoyance. A secret, perhaps? Or a knowledge he wasn't willing to share? "Fine," I said, backing away. "But this isn't over. That statue is out there somewhere, and I'm going to find it. As I turned to leave, I heard the caretaker mutter something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent a chill down my spine. It sounded almost like a prayer. I spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened anxiety, jumping at every sound and shadow. I called in sick to work, unable to focus on anything but the missing statue. Where had it gone? What was it planning? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my yard, I found myself drawn to the windows. I peered out cautiously, half expecting to see the angel standing there, watching me with its blank stone eyes. But there was nothing, just the quiet, empty yard and the darkening sky beyond. I paced my living room, trying to decide what to do. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? That a statue had come to life and was stalking me? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was crazy. As night fell, I found myself sitting in the dark, too afraid to turn on any lights. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. That's when I heard it. At first it was so faint I thought I might be imagining it. A soft, rhythmic sound, like the beating of wings. It seemed to be coming from just outside my window. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The sound grew louder, more insistent. Thump, thump, thump. Like a massive stone heart coming to life. With trembling hands, I reached for the curtains. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but look outside. But I had to know. I had to see. Slowly, I pulled back the fabric, peering out into the darkness. My heart stopped. There, in the middle of my yard, stood the angel statue. Its wings were fully extended, casting impossible shadows in the moonlight. Its blank eyes, once empty and lifeless, now seemed to glow with an inner malevolence, and it was looking directly at me. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. But even as I tried to deny what I was seeing, the statue moved. It was a subtle motion, just a slight tilt of its head, but it was enough to send me into a panic. I ran to my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. There's someone in my yard, I gasped. A statue, it's alive, it's looking at me. Please, you have to send someone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sir, did you say a statue is in your yard? Yes, I shouted, frustration mixing with my fear. I know it sounds crazy, but you have to believe me. It's been following me, moving closer every night, and now it's here. Please, send someone. Sir, calm down, the operator said, her voice tinged with concern. Are you sure you're not seeing things? Have you been drinking or taking any medications? I wanted to scream. Why wouldn't anyone believe me? No, I'm not drunk or high. I'm telling you, there's a living statue in my yard right now. It's dangerous. Please just send someone to check. All right, sir, the operator said, clearly humoring me. I'll send a patrol car to your address, but please stay inside and try to calm down. Can you do that for me? Yes, I'll stay inside, I promised, my eyes never leaving the window. Just hurry, please. I hung up and crept back to the window, dreading what I might see. The statue hadn't moved. It still stood in the center of my yard, its wings spread wide, its eyes fixed on my house. But now, in the dim light of the moon, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. Its lips, once set in a serene expression, were now curved into a smile. A cold, cruel smile that promised things beyond my worst nightmares. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and waited. The sound of wings beating filled the air, growing louder and louder until it was all I could hear. Thump, 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 like footsteps, like a heartbeat, like the inexorable approach of something that should not exist. As I sat there paralyzed with fear, I realized a terrible truth. The police wouldn't be able to help me. No one would be able to help me. Whatever this thing was, whatever it wanted, it was coming for me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The beating of wings grew louder, drowning out even the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. And somewhere in the depths of my terror-stricken mind, A small voice whispered a chilling thought. This is only the beginning. The sound of wings beating outside had become a constant, maddening rhythm. I scrambled through the house, pushing furniture against doors and windows, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip anything. Sweat poured down my face as I worked, my eyes constantly darting to the windows, dreading what I might see. And then I saw it. The statue's hand, once frozen in an eternal gesture of blessing, twitched. Its marble fingers curled slowly, deliberately, like a spider preparing to pounce. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. But it was. As I watched, paralyzed with terror, the statue's entire arm began to move. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed and fluidity. It was as if the stone was coming to life, transforming from rigid marble into something terrifyingly organic. That's when the lights went out. The sudden darkness was absolute, suffocating. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, let alone the horror that waited outside. But I could hear it. Oh God, I could hear it. The beating of wings had stopped. In its place came a new sound, one that sent ice through my veins. The slow, inexorable scrape of stone against wood. It was at my front door. I fumbled in the darkness, searching desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a heavy table lamp, and I clutched it to my chest like a lifeline. The scraping continued, punctuated now by the sharp crack of splintering wood. It was breaking through. It was coming for me. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I ran, stumbling through the darkness towards the stairs. I had to get higher, had to find a place to hide. The attic. Yes, the attic. It was my only chance. I scrambled up the stairs, the sound of breaking wood growing louder behind me. I could hear the front door giving way, could almost feel the cold presence of the statue entering my home. With trembling hands, I pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up, pulling it closed behind me. The musty smell of old wood and dust filled my nostrils as I crawled through the cramped space, searching for a hiding spot. My hand brushed against something. A box, perhaps? No, it felt like a book. An old leather-bound journal, hidden away in the rafters. Curiosity momentarily overcame fear. I pulled out my phone, using its feeble light to examine my find. The journal was ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle. As I carefully opened it, a slip of paper fell out. It was a photograph, faded with age, showing a familiar sight. The angel statue standing proudly at the entrance of the cemetery. But there was something different about it, something in its pose, in the set of its stone features that sent a chill down my spine. It looked alive. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs jolted me back to reality. It was coming. I had to hide. I wedged myself into a corner, pulling an old tarp over me. With shaking hands, I found a stubby candle in my pocket, a souvenir from a long-ago birthday dinner, and lit it with my lighter. The tiny flame cast grotesque shadows on the attic walls, but it was better than the oppressive darkness. As the footsteps grew closer, I opened the journal and began to read. If these were to be my final moments, I needed to understand why this was happening. The journal belonged to a man named Edgar Worthington, who had lived in this house nearly a century ago. His neat, precise handwriting told a tale that made my blood run cold. April 15th, 1924. It arrived today, the statue I commissioned for dear Elizabeth's grave. It's a magnificent piece, an angel of the finest Italian marble. The sculptor assured me it would watch over her for eternity. If only he knew the truth of his words. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning frantically for more information. The entries became more erratic, more desperate as time went on. June 3rd, 1924. I saw it move. God help me, I saw it move. Just a twitch of its fingers. But I know what I saw. Elizabeth, my love, what have I done? August 17th, 1924. It's getting closer. Every night it inches nearer to the house. I've tried everything. Salt lines, holy water, prayers to every god I know. Nothing stops it, nothing slows it. It's coming for me, and I fear I know why. The final entry made my heart stop. September 1st, 1924. I understand now. The sculptor didn't just create a statue. He created a vessel for something ancient, something hungry. It feeds on grief, on loss, on the pain of those left behind. And I, in my sorrow, have given it the perfect feast. Elizabeth, forgive me. I'm so sorry. The journal ended there. What had happened to Edgar? Had the statue claimed him, as it now sought to claim me? A loud crash from below startled me out of my thoughts. It had broken through the attic door. I could hear it moving below, searching, hunting. In that moment, I understood with terrible clarity. I wasn't the first to be haunted by this thing. And if I didn't find a way to stop it, I wouldn't be the last. The candlelight flickered, casting monstrous shadows on the wall. Among them, I saw a shape that didn't belong, a shape with wings. I turned slowly, the journal clutched to my chest, to face the thing that had once been a statue. Its blank eyes stared into mine, and its lips curled into a smile that promised an eternity of suffering. As it reached for me with hands of living stone, I realized that my nightmare was far from over. It had only just begun. The attic felt like a tomb, the air thick with dust and the weight of forgotten secrets. My trembling hands clutched the ancient journal, its pages whispering tales of horror as I frantically read by the flickering candlelight. Each word seemed to carve itself into my mind, revealing a history far darker than I could have imagined. The journal's yellowed pages spoke of a ritual performed in this very house decades ago. The previous owner, Edgar Worthington, had been more than just a grieving widower. He had been a man consumed by his loss, willing to go to any lengths to bring back his beloved Elizabeth. October 31st, 1924, All Hallows' Eve. The veil between worlds is at its thinnest. I have prepared everything as the medium instructed. The candles, the salt circle, the offerings, and the statue. Oh, Elizabeth, forgive me for what I'm about to do. I shuddered as I read on, the details of the ritual unfolding before my eyes. Edgar had sought out a backstreet medium, a woman known for trafficking with forces beyond mortal ken. She had promised him a way to bind his wife's spirit to the world of the living, to give him one last chance to say goodbye. But the price had been steep. The medium had warned him that such magic always came with a cost, that the forces they would be dealing with were not to be trifled with. Edgar, blinded by grief and desperation, had agreed to anything. The medium chanted in a language I didn't recognize, her voice growing louder and more frenzied with each passing moment. The candles flickered wildly, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. And then, oh God, and then I saw it. The statue's eyes. They opened. My blood ran cold as I read Edgar's account of what happened next. The ritual had worked, but not in the way he had hoped. Instead of binding Elizabeth's spirit to the statue, they had created a vessel for something far more ancient and malevolent. A demon, hungry for the pain and grief of the living. The journal went on to detail the fates of subsequent homeowners, each drawn to the house by some inexplicable force, each falling victim to the statue's curse. Their stories were etched in blood and terror, a litany of lost souls claimed by the demon bound to stone. April 17th, 1956. Found the body of John Carpenter in the attic today. Poor bastard had been missing for weeks. His face. Christ, I've never seen fear like that on a dead man's face. The statue was back on its pedestal when we checked, looking as innocent as ever. But I know better now. I know what it's capable of. As I read, I became aware of a change in the atmosphere around me. The temperature seemed to plummet, my breath coming out in visible puffs in the suddenly frigid air. The oppressive weight of an unseen presence pressed down on me, as if the very shadows were watching, waiting. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, just the power of suggestion from the horrifying tales I was reading. But deep down I knew better. I knew I wasn't alone in that attic. The candle sputtered and died, plunging me into darkness. In the silence that followed, I heard it, the slow, inexorable scrape of stone against wood, coming from the attic stairs. My heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any source of light. As the screen flickered to life, casting a pale glow around me, I heard a sound that turned my blood to ice. The attic door flew open with a resounding crash. Slowly, terrified of what I might see but unable to look away, I turned my phone's light toward the stairs. There at the bottom stood the statue. Its blank eyes seemed to bore into me, its arms outstretched in a grotesque parody of an embrace. And then it began to climb. Panic overtook me. I scrambled backward, my eyes darting around frantically for any means of escape. The journal slipped from my grasp, landing open on the floor. As I reached for it, a line caught my eye. The demon is bound to the statue, but the statue is bound to the land. It cannot leave the confines of the property it was created to guard. In that moment, a desperate plan formed in my mind. If I could just get off the property, maybe I'd be safe. Maybe I could break free of this nightmare. My eyes fell on the small attic window. It was tight, but I thought I could fit through. Beyond it lay the roof, and beyond that, freedom. The statue was halfway up the stairs now, its movements fluid and terrifyingly fast for something made of stone. I could hear the grind of marble against wood, could almost feel the cold radiating from its unnatural form. With shaking hands, I wrenched open the window. The cool night air hit my face, carrying with it the promise of escape. I grabbed the journal. I couldn't leave it behind, not when it held so many answers, and began to squeeze through the opening. I was halfway out when I felt it. Cold, unyielding fingers wrapping around my ankle. I kicked frantically, a scream tearing from my throat as I fought against the statue's grip. "No!" I yelled, my voice raw with terror. "Let me go! You can't have me!" The statue's only response was to tighten its grip, slowly, inexorably pulling me back into the attic. I could feel the strength in those marble fingers, knew that in moments it would drag me to my doom. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I kicked out with all my might. I felt something give. Whether it was the statue's grip or my own ankle, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that suddenly I was free, tumbling out onto the roof with the journal clutched to my chest. I scrambled across the shingles, not daring to look back. The edge of the roof loomed before me, beyond it the ground that promised safety. But it was so far down. A crash behind me made the decision for me. I looked back to see the statue forcing its way through the attic window, its stone features twisted into a mask of inhuman rage. I closed my eyes, said a silent prayer, and jumped. The fall seemed to last an eternity. The wind rushed past me, carrying with it the sound of stone scraping against stone, and then with a bone-jarring impact, I hit the ground. Pain exploded through my body, but I forced myself to move. Rolling onto my back, I looked up at the roof, half expecting to see the statue looming over me. But there was nothing. Just the empty window, dark and silent. Groaning, I pulled myself to my feet. Every part of me ached, but nothing seemed to be broken. The journal was still clutched in my hands, its secrets now mine to unravel. As I limped away from the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The statue might be bound to the property, but the evil it represented, the hungry ancient thing that lurked within its marble form, was far from defeated. I had escaped for now. But as I disappeared into the night, the weight of the journal heavy in my hands, I knew that my journey into darkness was only just beginning. The cold night air whipped around me as I clung desperately to the roof's slanted surface. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of how close I was to death. The journal lay open before me, its pages fluttering in the wind, revealing cryptic instructions that seemed impossible to decipher in my panic. Come on, I muttered, my eyes scanning the faded text. There has to be something here, some way to end this nightmare. The scraping sound of stone against shingles made me look up. My blood ran cold as I saw the statue climbing onto the roof, its movements unnaturally fluid for something made of marble. Its blank eyes seemed to glow with an inner malevolence as it fixed its gaze on me. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "I'm warning you." The statue's lips curled into a cruel smile, as if mocking my futile threats. It took another step forward, the roof creaking ominously under its weight. I turned back to the journal, desperation lending me focus. There, scrawled in the margin of one page, was a series of words in a language I didn't recognize. Below it, in shaky English, was written, "The Banishing Rite. Speak these words only in direst need, for they call upon powers beyond mortal ken." It was my only hope. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Ashnaz Durbatuluk," I began, the strange syllables feeling heavy on my tongue. "Ashnaz Gimbatul, Ashnaz Trakatuluk Akburzum Ishi Krimpatul." As I spoke, the air around me began to change. It grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. The statue paused in its advance, its head tilting as if listening. Emboldened, I continued the incantation, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Klatu barada nikto, fanglui mulunav Cthulhu relia wugahanaglftang." The statue shuddered, its marble surface rippling like water. Before my horrified eyes, its form began to shift and change. The angelic features melted away, revealing something ancient and terrible beneath. The demon's true form was a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes, a blasphemous amalgamation of shapes that hurt to look upon. It let out a shriek that shattered the night, a sound of rage and pain that made me want to claw out my own ears. "You dare?" it hissed, its voice a cacophony of whispers and screams. "You dare to banish me, mortal?" I scrambled backward, nearly losing my grip on the roof. "Stay away from me," I shouted, my voice hoarse with terror. The demon laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming children. "I have feasted on the grief and pain of your kind for centuries. Did you think a few words could stop me?" But even as it spoke, I could see the effect the ritual was having. The air above us began to swirl, coalescing into a vortex of eldritch energies. The demon's form seemed to waver, drawn towards the swirling portal. "No!" it roared, its tentacles lashing out, gouging deep furrows in the roof. "I will not be banished. I will not return to the void." I pressed on with the incantation, my voice rising to a shout to be heard over the howling wind and the demon's screams. "Ia, Ia, Cthulhu Ftang, by the powers of earth and sky I banish thee." The vortex grew stronger, its pull becoming irresistible. The demon's form began to crumble, pieces of stone and writhing flesh being sucked into the swirling maw. For a moment I allowed myself to hope. It was working. The nightmare was almost over. But then, just as the last of its stone form was disintegrating, the demon made one final desperate lunge. Its tentacles, now more ethereal than physical, wrapped around my ankle. "If I go," it snarled, its voice fading even as its grip tightened, "you're coming with me." I felt myself being dragged across the roof towards the howling vortex. My fingers scrabbled for purchase on the shingles, leaving bloody trails as I fought against the demon's pull. "No!" I screamed, terror lending me strength. "Let me go." But the demon's grip was implacable. Inch by inch it pulled me closer to the portal. I could feel the energies radiating from it, cold and ancient and utterly alien. My mind reeled at the thought of what might lie on the other side. In desperation, I grabbed onto the chimney, wrapping my arms around it as tightly as I could. The demon howled in frustration, its tentacles pulling with inhuman strength. "You cannot escape, mortal," it hissed. "Your soul is mine." I could feel my grip slipping, my arms burning with the effort of holding on. The vortex loomed ever closer, its maw promising an eternity of torment. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew no help could come. "Somebody, please." As if in answer to my plea, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was a woman's voice, strong and clear, speaking words of power that made the air itself tremble. "By the light of the moon and the strength of the earth, I command thee, demon, release him." The demon's grip faltered, its tentacles loosening for just a moment. It was all I needed. With a final desperate heave, I tore myself free, rolling away from the vortex's pull. I looked up to see a figure standing at the edge of the roof. She was old, her hair white as snow, but her eyes blazed with an inner fire that spoke of great power. Who are you?" I gasped, my voice weak with relief and lingering terror. The old woman smiled, a grim expression that held no mirth. "Someone who's been waiting a long time for this moment," she said. Then, turning to face the demon, her voice rang out once more. "Now, creature of darkness, return to the void from whence you came." The demon let out one final earth-shaking roar of defiance, but it was too late. The vortex's pull grew stronger, irresistible. With a sound like tearing reality, the demon was sucked into the portal. For a moment, the night was filled with swirling energies and unearthly screams. Then, with a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the house, the vortex collapsed in on itself and vanished. Silence fell, broken only by my ragged breathing and the gentle whisper of the wind. The old woman approached me, her movements spry despite her apparent age. She held out a hand to help me up. "Are you all right, child?" she asked, her voice now gentle. I took her hand, wincing at the pain in my battered body. I think so," I managed. "Thank you. But who are you? How did you know?" She smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. "My name is Agatha," she said, "and I've been waiting for this night for a very long time. Come, we have much to discuss, and this roof is no place for such a conversation." As we carefully made our way back into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that while one chapter of this nightmare had ended, another was just beginning. The demon was gone, but the mystery remained. Who was Agatha? How had she known about the demon? And most importantly, what other secrets did this house and the journal I still clutched in my hands hold? As we descended into the quiet house, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. A new day was beginning, but I had a feeling that the darkness was far from over. The world around me dissolved into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and writhing shapes. We were falling, the demon and I, plummeting through dimensions beyond human comprehension. Its tentacles were still wrapped around my body, cold and unyielding, as we tumbled through the void. "You fool!" the demon's voice thundered in my mind, a cacophony of 1,000 tormented souls. "Do you realize what you've done? Where we are?" I couldn't answer, couldn't even scream. The otherworldly energies tore at my very being, threatening to unmake me atom by atom. But through the pain and terror, I clung to one thought. I had to finish the ritual. It was the only way to end this nightmare. As we fell, flashes of the demon's past victims seared themselves into my consciousness. I saw a Roman centurion, his face twisted in horror as marble hands closed around his throat. A medieval peasant woman, her eyes wide with terror as she was dragged into the shadows. A dapper gentleman from the roaring 20s, his last breath escaping in a plume of cigarette smoke as the statue's wings enveloped him. Their screams echoed in my ears, a chorus of agony that spanned centuries. Each victim's pain, their fear, their final moments. I felt it all as if it were my own. "Do you see now?" the demon hissed, its voice dripping with malicious glee. "Do you understand the futility of your struggle? I have fed on the misery of your kind for eons. What hope do you have against such power?" But with each vision, each echo of past torment, I felt something stirring within me. Not fear, not despair, but a burning resolve. These souls, these countless victims, they deserved justice. They deserved peace. With monumental effort, I forced my lips to move, continuing the banishment ritual. By the powers of light and dark, of earth and sky, I rasped, each word feeling like fire in my throat. "I cast you out, creature of shadow." The demon's grip tightened, its tentacles digging into my flesh. "Silence," it roared. But I could hear a note of panic in its otherworldly voice. We tumbled through a dimension of crystalline spires that sang with alien melodies, then plunged into an ocean of liquid fire. The pain was indescribable, but still I pressed on. By the names of the ancient ones, by the power of the stars themselves, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I banish you from this realm and all others. The demon thrashed wildly, its form shifting and changing as it tried to maintain its hold on me. You cannot defeat me, it shrieked. I am eternal. I am fear itself. But I could feel its grip weakening. The otherworldly energies that had been tearing at me now seemed to flow through me, empowering my words. We burst into a vast, empty space, a void filled with nothing but distant, dying stars. Here, suspended between realities, I saw the demon's true form. It was a thing of nightmares, a writhing mass of darkness and hunger that defied description. But in that moment, facing the source of so much suffering, I felt no fear. Hear me, powers beyond mortal ken, I shouted, my voice ringing out in the cosmic silence. This creature has violated the laws of nature and spirit. It has preyed upon the innocent and feasted on grief. I call upon you to judge it. The void around us began to shift, coalescing into shapes that hurt to look upon. Ancient entities, older than time itself, turned their unfathomable gazes upon us. The demon's confidence faltered. For the first time, I sensed true fear emanating from it. No, it whimpered, its voice suddenly small and pitiful. Not them. Anything but them. I pressed my advantage, drawing upon reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. By the authority granted to me by these cosmic judges, I cast you out. Return to the darkness from whence you came, never to trouble the realms of the living again. With a final, desperate surge of strength, I tore myself free from the demon's grasp. Its tentacles grasped at empty air as I pushed away, watching as the creature was sucked into a swirling vortex of judgment. This isn't over, it howled, its form already beginning to disintegrate. I will return. I will have my vengeance. But its threats were empty. I watched as the cosmic forces tore it apart, scattering its essence across the multiverse. Its screams faded, replaced by a deafening silence. And then, with a jolt that felt like being struck by lightning, I found myself back on my roof. The shattered remains of the statue lay scattered around me, nothing more than lifeless chunks of marble. The first rays of dawn were peeking over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I lay there for a long moment, my chest heaving as I gulped down breaths of sweet earth air. Every part of me ached, and my mind reeled from the impossible journey I had just experienced. But I was alive. I had survived. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. The roof creaked beneath me, damaged from the supernatural battle that had taken place. As I surveyed the destruction, a voice called out from below. "Hello, is anyone up there?" I peered over the edge of the roof to see a concerned-looking neighbor standing in my yard, squinting up at me. "I'm okay," I called down, my voice hoarse and shaky. Just had a bit of an accident. I'll be down in a minute." As I carefully made my way back to the attic window, I couldn't help but laugh. An accident. How could I even begin to explain what had really happened? Back in the attic, I found the journal where I had dropped it. Its pages were singed and crumbling, as if it had aged centuries in the span of a single night. But as I flipped through it, I realized that new text had appeared, written in a hand I didn't recognize. To the one who has banished the demon, it read, "Your journey is not over. The statue was but one vessel, one tendril of a darkness that reaches far beyond our world. Be vigilant, for there are other artifacts, other gateways. The fight continues." I closed the journal, a mix of emotions swirling within me. Relief at having survived, pride at having defeated the demon, but also a creeping dread at the thought of what might still be out there. As I made my way downstairs to face the new day and the inevitable questions from my neighbor, I knew that my life had changed forever. The veil had been lifted, and I had glimpsed realities beyond human comprehension. The demon was gone, its statue destroyed. But as I stepped out into the morning light, the journal's warning echoed in my mind. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The wail of sirens pierced the early morning air as police cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of my house. I sat on the front steps wrapped in a shock blanket, trying to make sense of the night's events. The journal lay heavy in my lap, a tangible reminder that it hadn't all been a nightmare. Officer Sarah Johnson approached me, her face a mask of professional concern. "Sir, can you tell me again what happened here?" I took a deep breath, knowing how insane my story would sound. There was a statue. It came to life. It was possessed by a demon, and it tried to kill me. Officer Johnson's eyebrows shot up. "A demon-possessed statue," she repeated flatly. "Sir, have you been drinking or perhaps using any recreational substances?" "I know how it sounds," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "But look at the roof. Look at the destruction. How do you explain that?" She glanced up at the damaged roof, then back at me. "We'll need to conduct a full investigation. In the meantime, I think it might be best if you came down to the station with us." As I was about to protest, a commotion near the cemetery caught our attention. Several officers were leading a handcuffed figure towards one of the patrol cars. With a jolt, I recognized the cemetery caretaker. "You don't understand," he was shouting, his eyes wild. "It was supposed to protect us. It was our guardian." Officer Johnson frowned. "Looks like we picked up your friend here trying to destroy evidence at the cemetery. Care to explain how he fits into your story?" Before I could answer, a deep voice cut through the chaos. "I believe I can shed some light on this situation, officers." We turned to see an elderly man in a tweed suit approaching. He carried himself with an air of authority that made even the skeptical officers stand a little straighter. "Professor Archibald Blackwood," he introduced himself, showing a badge to Officer Johnson. "I'm with the Department of Paranormal Investigations." Officer Johnson's eyes widened. I didn't know such a department existed. Blackwood smiled thinly. "That's rather the point, my dear. Now, if you'll allow me to speak with our friend here, I believe we can sort this all out." As the officers stepped back, Blackwood turned to me. "You've had quite a night, haven't you, son? Why don't you tell me everything? And don't leave out a single detail, no matter how strange it might seem." For the next hour, I recounted my harrowing experience. Blackwood listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather-bound book. When I finished, he nodded gravely. "It's as I feared," he murmured. "The cult of the Stone Angel has been active again." "Cult?" I asked, my mind reeling. "What cult?" Blackwood sighed. "A very old, very dangerous group that worships entities from beyond our reality. They've been using statues as conduits for these beings for centuries. Your friend the caretaker," he gestured towards the police car, "is likely a member." As if on cue, the caretaker began shouting again. "The Great One will return. You cannot stop the inevitable." Blackwood shook his head. "I'm afraid your actions have disrupted their plans quite significantly. You should be proud, but also cautious. They won't take this lightly." Over the next few weeks, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The roof was repaired, the broken windows replaced. The official story was that a freak storm had caused the damage, and most people seemed content with that explanation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat, every statue a potential vessel for unspeakable horrors. The journal became my constant companion. Its cryptic warnings a reminder of the battle I had fought, and the war that apparently still raged in secret. 1 month after that fateful night, I found myself standing at the gates of the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the incident, but I felt drawn here, needing some kind of closure. The cemetery was quiet, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. I walked slowly among the gravestones, remembering the visions of past victims I had seen during my otherworldly struggle with the demon. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the silent stones, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. But it's over now. You can rest." As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. There, near the spot where the angel statue had once stood, was a new monument. It was a figure of a weeping woman, her stone face hidden behind her hands. A chill ran down my spine as I approached it. There was something off about its proportions, something not quite right in the way the light played across its surface. And then, for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a finger move. Terror gripped me as I stumbled backward, my eyes fixed on the statue. Was it my imagination? A trick of the light? Or had the battle truly not ended that night on my roof? As I turned to run, I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye. The statue's hands had lowered, revealing a face twisted into a malevolent grin. Its eyes, once blank stone, now gleamed with an inner light as they followed my retreat. I ran faster than I ever had before, not stopping until I was safely in my car, the doors locked and the engine running. As I sped away from the cemetery, Blackwood's words echoed in my mind. Be proud, but also cautious. They won't take this lightly. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Blackwood had given me. "Professor," I said as soon as he answered, "we have a problem. It's happening again." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When Blackwood spoke, his voice was grim. "I was afraid of this. Where are you now?" "Driving away from the cemetery as fast as I can," I replied, checking my rearview mirror nervously. "Good. Come to my office immediately. It seems your role in this war is far from over, my friend." As I drove through the darkening streets, my mind raced with possibilities and fears. The demon I had banished might be gone, but it was clear now that it had been just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The cult of the Stone Angel was still out there, still working towards some nefarious goal, and somehow, I had become a key player in a cosmic battle I barely understood. The journal sat on the passenger seat beside me, its pages seeming to whisper ancient secrets. I realized now that my life would never truly return to normal. The veil had been lifted, and I had glimpsed realities beyond human comprehension. There was no going back. As I pulled up to Blackwood's office, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. Some battles, it seemed, never truly end. But I was no longer the same person who had cowered in fear at the sight of a moving statue. I had faced the darkness and survived. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever horrors the cult might unleash, I would face them. Not just for my own sake, but for all those who had fallen victim to these otherworldly terrors throughout history. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, I was ready to fight. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of the television, its flickering light dancing across the walls like restless spirits. I sank deeper into my favorite armchair, the leather creaking beneath me, a sound as familiar and comforting as an old friend's laughter. At my feet, Max lounged, his golden fur catching the light, his eyes heavy with contentment. It was just another Tuesday night. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. Or so I thought. I reached for the remote, flipping through channels with the mindless determination of a man avoiding his own thoughts. "What do you think, buddy? Nature documentary or true crime?" I asked Max, not expecting an answer. He never gave one, of course. He was a dog, after all. Max's tail thumped against the floor twice, his way of acknowledging he'd heard me without bothering to lift his head. I chuckled, settling on a program about unsolved mysteries. The irony of that choice wouldn't hit me until much later. As the night wore on, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, pooling in the corners and creeping along the edges of the furniture. I blamed it on fatigue, my eyes playing tricks in the low light. But there was something else, a heaviness in the air that I couldn't quite place. It started with a change in Max's breathing. At first it was subtle, a slight catch, a wheeze that hadn't been there before. I leaned forward, concern furrowing my brow. "Max, you okay, boy?" His eyes met mine, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, I could have sworn they looked different. Older, wiser, impossible, of course. I shook my head, trying to clear the cobwebs of late-night imagination. But then it happened. The moment that would change everything. The instant that would draw a stark line between the before and after of my life. Max opened his mouth, and what came out wasn't a bark, wasn't a whine, wasn't anything I'd ever heard from him or any other dog in my life. It was a voice, deep, guttural, ancient. It spoke words that no canine throat should be able to form, in a language that sent chills racing down my spine. Ya, Fanglui Maglunaf Cthulhu Riliew Gahnagelftang. I stumbled backward, my feet tangling in the throw rug, sending me crashing to the floor. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of terror and disbelief. "What the hell?" I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. "Max?" But the dog before me, if it was still a dog at all, merely stared, its eyes now glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. When it spoke again, the words were in English, but they brought no comfort. "The sleeper awakens," Max intoned, his canine mouth moving in ways it was never meant to. "The stars align, and the gateway opens. You have been chosen, Robert. You alone can hear the call." I scrambled backward, my hands scrabbling against the hardwood floor. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. "This isn't real," I muttered, squeezing my eyes shut. "When I open my eyes, everything will be normal. Max will be Max, and dogs don't talk, and—" "Open your eyes, Robert," the voice commanded, and to my horror I obeyed. Max stood before me now, his posture unnaturally erect, his eyes blazing with eldritch fire. The veil between worlds grows thin. They push against the boundaries, seeking entry. You must listen. You must learn. You must prepare. Prepare for what? I heard myself ask, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. Who are they? A low, rumbling laugh emanated from Max's throat, a sound that should have been impossible for a dog to make. Questions. Always questions. Humans never change no matter how many eons pass. But answers will come, Robert. In time. For now, you must listen. And so I listened. For what felt like hours, Max spoke in that deep, ancient voice. He told me of beings older than time, of cosmic horrors that lurked beyond the stars, of prophecies and promises made before mankind ever crawled from the primordial ooze. As he spoke, the room around us seemed to twist and warp. Shadows danced and writhed on the walls, taking on shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to creep through the windows, Max fell silent, his eyes still glowing with that unnatural light bored into mine. "Remember, Robert," he growled. "Remember and prepare. They are coming." With those final words, Max's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the floor. I rushed to his side, my hands shaking as I checked for signs of life. To my relief, his chest still rose and fell with steady breaths. As the adrenaline began to fade, exhaustion hit me like a physical force. I slumped against the wall, my mind reeling from everything I'd heard. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as a vivid nightmare, a product of too much late-night television and an overactive imagination. But as I looked down at my hands, I saw strange symbols etched into my palms, symbols I'd never seen before, yet somehow understood. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that everything had changed. I glanced at Max, still unconscious on the floor, and wondered what other secrets he held, what other horrors awaited us in the days to come. As the sun rose outside, painting the room in hues of gold and orange, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the darkened living room, casting eerie shadows across the walls. My eyes burned from hours of staring at obscure websites and ancient texts, desperately seeking answers to questions I never thought I'd ask. The words Max had spoken echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain that refused to be silenced. Ia! Ia! Funglui maglunaf Cthulhu rilie wugahnaglftagan. I muttered the phrase under my breath, tasting the alien syllables on my tongue. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for any reference, any hint of meaning. Page after page of occult lore and conspiracy theories filled my screen, each more outlandish than the last. As the first hints of dawn began to creep through the windows, I rubbed my bleary eyes, feeling no closer to understanding than when I'd begun. The house was eerily quiet, the usual comforting sounds of Max's breathing or the occasional jingle of his collar conspicuously absent. With a groan, I pushed myself up from the couch, my joints protesting after hours of inactivity. "Max," I called out, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Here, boy." No response came. A tendril of unease curled in my gut as I made my way to the kitchen, drawn by some instinct I couldn't name. As I rounded the corner, I froze in my tracks. Max sat in the center of the kitchen, his posture unnaturally erect, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. He didn't wag his tail, didn't tilt his head in that endearing way he usually did when I entered a room. He just watched. "Max?" I whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. "Are you... you?" For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, deliberately, Max's mouth opened. "The one you call Max is here," came that deep, ancient voice that had no place coming from a dog's muzzle. "But he is not alone. We speak through him, Robert. We have much to tell you." My hand trembled as I reached out to touch him, some part of me still desperate to prove this was all an elaborate hoax or a vivid hallucination. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" As my fingers brushed Max's fur, a jolt of energy surged through me. Images flashed before my eyes, vast cyclopean cities beneath roiling seas, monstrous shapes moving in the spaces between stars, ancient rituals performed on blood-soaked altars. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, but Max's voice followed me, relentless and terrifying. "We are the old ones," he intoned. "We who slumber in the dark places of the earth in the depths of space and time. We who were old when your kind still huddled in caves, fearing the night. And now, Robert, we wake. The stars align, the barriers weaken, and soon we shall return to claim what was always ours." "No," I whispered, shaking my head in denial. "This can't be real. You can't be real." A sound that might have been laughter emanated from Max's throat, a dry, rattling noise that set my teeth on edge. Real and unreal. What are these to beings such as us? We are beyond your comprehension, Robert. But you have been chosen. You will be our herald, our voice in this world of flesh and bone. I backed away, my hand fumbling for something, anything to write with. I found a pen and an old envelope, and as Max continued to speak, I scribbled frantically, my handwriting growing more erratic with each passing moment. "Listen well, for this is the prophecy that shall shape the fate of your world," Max growled. "When the stars align in the pattern of the elder sign, when the seas boil and the skies burn, the gateway shall open. From Relia we shall rise, from Yuggoth we shall descend. The cities of man shall crumble, and a new age of terror and wonder shall dawn." My hand shook so violently I could barely form the words, but I forced myself to continue writing. This was madness, utter madness, and yet I knew with bone-deep certainty that every word was true. "But beware," Max continued, his eyes now glowing with an eldritch light. "There are those who would stop us, who cling to their pitiful notion of reality. The esoteric order of Dagon moves against us, thinking their paltry magics can hold back the tide. You must thwart them, Robert. You must pave the way for our return." Questions tumbled from my lips, a torrent of confusion and fear. Why me? What am I supposed to do? How can I possibly... But Max's voice grew louder, drowning out my protests. "Seek the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead. Within its pages lies the key to our summoning. But be warned, Knowledge comes at a price, and those who delve too deep may find their sanity slipping away. As he spoke these final words, a change came over Max. The otherworldly glow in his eyes flickered and faded, and his body began to sway. With a whimper that sounded painfully canine, he collapsed to the kitchen floor. "Max!" I cried out, rushing to his side. My hands trembled as I checked for signs of life, relief washing over me as I felt the steady rise and fall of his chest. He was alive, but unconscious, his body likely overwhelmed by the cosmic forces that had used it as a conduit. I sat back on my heels, the scribbled envelope clutched in my hand, and tried to process everything I just heard. The magnitude of it all threatened to crush me. Ancient beings awakening, a cosmic war brewing, and somehow, impossibly, I was at the center of it all. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as a delusion, to rip up the envelope and pretend none of this had ever happened. But as I looked down at my hands, I saw again those strange symbols that had appeared the night before, now pulsing with a faint, otherworldly light. This was real. All of it. And I had been chosen, for better or worse. With shaking hands, I smoothed out the crumpled envelope and read over the prophecy I'd scrawled. Each word seemed to burn itself into my mind, a terrible knowledge that I knew would haunt my dreams for years to come. As the morning sun finally broke over the horizon, painting the kitchen in hues of gold and orange, I made a decision. I would seek out this Necronomicon, this Book of the Dead. I would unravel the mysteries that had been thrust upon me, no matter the cost. But as I looked at Max, still unconscious on the floor, a flicker of doubt passed through me. What price would I have to pay for this forbidden knowledge? And when the time came, would I have the strength to do what needed to be done? Only time would tell. For now, I was alone with the weight of cosmic secrets, the fate of the world resting on my shoulders. The sun might be rising, but I knew that a long night of the soul stretched out before me, with no guarantee of dawn at the end. The days following Max's prophetic revelation blended into a surreal haze of paranoia and mounting dread. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, a product of stress and lack of sleep. But as the strange occurrences began to pile up, I found it increasingly difficult to cling to any semblance of rational explanation. It started with small things. A book I'd left on the coffee table would be on the floor when I returned to the room. The framed photos on the mantel would be slightly askew, as if someone had examined them closely and hastily replaced them. I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision only to turn and find nothing there. "Get a grip, Robert," I muttered to myself one afternoon, after spending 10 minutes searching for my keys, only to find them in the refrigerator of all places. "You're losing it." But even as I tried to reassure myself, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were following my every move. Max's behavior only added to my unease. Gone was the playful, affectionate dog I'd known for years. In his place was a creature I hardly recognized, oscillating between two equally disturbing states. Sometimes he would sit for hours, completely motionless, staring at a blank wall or an empty corner of the room. His eyes, once warm and full of life, now seemed hollow and ancient. During these periods of eerie stillness, no amount of coaxing or commands could rouse him from his trance-like state. "Come on, boy," I'd plead, waving his favorite toy in front of his face. "Snap out of it, please." But Max would remain frozen, as if carved from stone, until whatever force held him in its grip decided to release him. Other times, Max would erupt into frenzied activity, racing through the house at breakneck speed, barking and growling at unseen threats. These episodes were almost worse than the periods of stillness, as they filled the house with a manic energy that set my nerves on edge. During one particularly intense outburst, I found Max in the study, tearing books from the shelves and scattering papers across the floor. "Max, stop," I shouted, trying to restrain him. "What's gotten into you?" As I grabbed his collar, he turned to face me, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that wasn't Max at all. Something ancient and terrible gazed out at me from behind those familiar brown eyes, and I recoiled in horror. The incident left me shaken, and that night I struggled to fall asleep. The house creaked and settled around me, each sound amplified by my frayed nerves. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were plagued by visions of vast, alien cities and monstrous shapes moving in the darkness. I jolted awake sometime in the early hours of the morning, my heart pounding in my chest. Something had disturbed my fitful slumber, but in the disorientation of sudden wakefulness, I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Then I saw him. Max stood at the foot of my bed, his outline barely visible in the gloom. But his eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, twin pinpricks of eldritch fire in the darkness. Max? I stammered, my mouth dry with fear. He didn't respond, didn't move, just continued to stare at me with those glowing eyes. Panic surged through me, and I reached for my phone on the nightstand, desperate to call someone, anyone who might be able to help. But as my fingers closed around the device, it shattered in my grip. The screen cracked and splintered, shards of glass biting into my palm. I yelped in pain and surprise, dropping the ruined phone to the floor. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, cradling my injured hand to my chest, and then I heard it. A whisper so faint I might have imagined it, yet so clear it seemed to reverberate through my very bones. "We are watching." The voice, if it could be called a voice, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was in the air around me, in the shadows that clung to the corners of the room, in the very marrow of my bones. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. "What do you want from me?" Silence was my only answer, but the feeling of being observed, of being surrounded by unseen presences, intensified. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen and writhe, taking on shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. I scrambled out of bed, my feet tangling in the sheets and sending me crashing to the floor. As I struggled to right myself, I realized with dawning horror that Max was no longer at the foot of the bed. In fact, he was nowhere to be seen. "Max?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where are you, boy?" A low growl emanated from somewhere in the darkness, a sound that was at once familiar and utterly alien. It was Max's voice, and yet not. Layered beneath the canine growl was something else, something that spoke of vast gulfs of space and time. "The veil grows thin," the voice rumbled, seeming to come from all around me. "The stars align, and the old ones stir in their slumber. You cannot escape your role in what is to come, Robert. We will be watching." Always watching. I pressed my back against the wall, my eyes darting frantically around the room, trying to locate the source of the voice. But there was nothing to see, only shifting shadows and the oppressive weight of unseen gazes. "Leave me alone," I pleaded, knowing even as I spoke how futile my words were. "I don't want any part of this." A sound that might have been laughter rippled through the darkness, cold and utterly devoid of mirth. "Want has nothing to do with it, little human. You have been chosen, and you will play your part willingly or not." The shadows seemed to press in closer, and I felt ghostly tendrils of something brushing against my skin. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the impossible things I was seeing and hearing. "This isn't real," I muttered, rocking back and forth. "This can't be real. I'm dreaming. I have to be dreaming." But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew the truth. This was no dream, no hallucination. The barriers between worlds were breaking down, and something ancient and terrible was pushing its way through. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, the oppressive presence slowly receded. I opened my eyes to find myself alone in my bedroom, everything seemingly back to normal, but the cuts on my hand from the shattered phone stung sharply, a painful reminder that the night's events had been all too real. Max padded into the room, looking for all the world like a normal, slightly sleepy dog. He approached me cautiously, as if sensing my distress, and gently licked my injured hand. I gazed into his eyes, searching for any sign of the otherworldly intelligence that had possessed him, but saw only the familiar warmth and loyalty I'd always known. "What's happening to us, Max?" I whispered, burying my face in his fur. He offered no answer, of course. But as I held him close, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both pawns in a game far beyond our understanding. And somewhere in the shadows, in the spaces between moments, unseen watchers waited and planned, their cosmic designs slowly unfolding around us. The sun might be rising, but I knew now that the darkness was always there, just out of sight, biding its time. And it was watching. Always watching. The crisp autumn air nipped at my face as I hurried down the leaf-strewn sidewalk towards the university's history department. My breath came out in small puffs, a visible reminder of my growing anxiety. After days of fruitless internet searches and sleepless nights, I had finally decided to seek professional help. Dr. Elias Blackwood, a renowned expert in ancient cultures and obscure mythologies, was my last hope for making sense of the madness that had engulfed my life. As I approached his office, I rehearsed my story in my head, trying to find a way to explain the inexplicable without sounding completely insane. I knocked on the heavy wooden door, my knuckles rapping out a staccato rhythm that matched my racing heart. "Come in," called a muffled voice from within. I stepped into the cluttered office, my eyes immediately drawn to the walls lined with bookshelves groaning under the weight of ancient tomes and peculiar artifacts. Behind a massive oak desk sat Dr. Blackwood, a man in his 60s with wild gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Dr. Blackwood?" I said, my voice shakier than I'd intended. "I'm Robert Kensington. I called earlier about—" Yes, he interrupted, gesturing for me to sit. "You mentioned something about ancient languages and prophecies. Quite intriguing. Please tell me everything." Taking a deep breath, I began to recount my experiences. I told him about Max's transformation, the eerie prophecies, the strange symbols that had appeared on my palms. As I spoke, Dr. Blackwood's expression shifted from polite interest to growing concern, and finally to unmistakable fear. "And then there was this phrase," I said, pulling out a scrap of paper on which I'd written the alien words. "Ia, feng luim gloanaf Cthulhu reliao ganaglftagen." The moment the words left my lips, Dr. Blackwood leapt to his feet, his face ashen. "Where did you hear that?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "From my dog," I replied, realizing how insane it sounded. Or rather, the thing speaking through my dog. "Doctor," Blackwood began to pace, muttering under his breath. I caught fragments of what seemed to be a prayer or incantation, but in no language I recognized. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and something else. Excitement? "Mr. Kensington," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm afraid I can't help you. What you're dealing with, it's beyond my expertise. Beyond anyone's expertise, really." "But you recognize that phrase," I protested. "You must know something." He shook his head vehemently. "Knowledge is dangerous, Mr. Kensington, especially knowledge of them. The less you know, the safer you'll be. For your own sake, forget everything you've seen and heard. Go home, hug your dog, and pretend none of this ever happened." Before I could argue further, Dr. Blackwood was ushering me towards the door. "I'm sorry I can't be of more help," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But trust me, this is for the best. Goodbye, Mr. Kensington, and good luck." With that, the door closed in my face, leaving me standing in the hallway, more confused and frustrated than ever. The drive home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Anger at Dr. Blackwood's dismissal warred with a growing sense of dread. He had known something, that much was clear. But his reaction only confirmed my worst fears. Whatever was happening was real, and it was far more dangerous than I had imagined. As I pulled into my driveway, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Max greeted me at the door, his tail wagging as if nothing was amiss. But as I bent to pet him, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on his left front paw, was a symbol I hadn't seen before, a complex, spiraling glyph that seemed to shimmer slightly in the fading light. "Oh, Max," I whispered. "What's happening to us?" I spent the next few hours pacing restlessly, torn between the desire to uncover the truth and the urge to heed Dr. Blackwood's warning and forget everything. It was well past midnight when the ping of an incoming email jolted me from my troubled reverie. The sender's address was a string of random numbers and letters, and the subject line was blank. With trembling fingers, I opened the message. There was no text, only an image attachment. I clicked to open it, and my breath caught in my throat. It was the same symbol I had seen on Max's paw, rendered in intricate detail. Beneath it was a string of characters that looked like no language I had ever seen, a mix of angular runes and flowing script that hurt my eyes to look at for too long. "What the hell?" I muttered, leaning closer to the screen. As I stared at the image, something strange began to happen. The symbols seemed to shift and dance, rearranging themselves before my eyes. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, they began to form words I could understand. "The key lies in the spaces between," I read aloud, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet room. "Where dreaming gods lie sleeping, the truth awaits. But beware, for knowledge comes at a price, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed." I scrambled for a pen and paper, frantically copying down the message before it could fade or change again. As I wrote, more words became clear, each revelation more terrifying than the last. "The hound of Tyndalos howls at the moon of madness," I muttered, my hand shaking as I transcribed the cryptic phrases. "In sunken Orlaye, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. The old ones were, the old ones are, and the old ones shall be again." Hours passed as I pored over the message, trying to decipher its hidden meanings. I scrawled diagrams and notes, connecting fragments of the prophecy Max had spoken with the new information before me. Slowly, a terrifying picture began to emerge, a cosmic horror beyond imagining, poised to break through into our world. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I felt I was on the verge of a breakthrough. One last symbol remained untranslated, a key that would unlock the final piece of the puzzle. "Come on," I urged myself, rubbing my bleary eyes. "Just a little more." And then, just as the symbol began to resolve itself into something I could understand, the lights flickered once, twice, and went out. The sudden darkness was absolute, as if all the light in the world had been extinguished in an instant. "No," I cried out, fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight. But the screen remained stubbornly dark, the battery inexplicably drained. In the pitch blackness, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the slow, deliberate padding of paws on hardwood floor. But the footsteps were too heavy, too purposeful to be Max's. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. The only response was a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then, a voice. Not Max's, not human, but something ancient and terrible that spoke directly into my mind. "You have seen too much, little one," it said, its words dripping with malevolent amusement. "But your journey is just beginning. The stars are right, and what was sunken shall rise. Prepare yourself, herald. The great old ones await." As the voice faded, I became aware of a presence in the room, vast and incomprehensible. The darkness seemed to deepen, if that were possible, pressing in on me from all sides. I could feel unseen tentacles of shadow brushing against my skin, probing, searching. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The lights flickered back to life, revealing my empty living room. Max lay curled up in his bed, watching me with wary eyes. But as I looked down at the notes spread before me, I realized with growing horror that this was far from over. The final piece of the puzzle had been revealed, and the knowledge it brought was a burden I wasn't sure I could bear. For I now knew that the boundary between our world and theirs was crumbling, and I, somehow, held the key to either salvation or damnation. The choice, it seemed, would be mine to make. As the sun rose on a new day, I couldn't shake the feeling that it might be one of the last dawns our world would ever see. The sky had been an ominous shade of green for days, a sickly hue that seemed to drain the color from everything beneath it. Weather forecasters were baffled, their sophisticated models and satellite imagery proving useless in the face of this unprecedented meteorological anomaly. But I knew better. The gathering storm wasn't just a quirk of nature. It was a harbinger of something far more terrifying. I stood at my living room window, watching as dark clouds roiled and churned overhead. The wind howled through the trees, bending them at impossible angles. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being twisted and warped by some unseen force. "This is it, isn't it, Max?" I murmured, glancing down at my faithful companion. What they warned us about." Max whined softly, pressing his body against my leg. His behavior had been increasingly erratic lately, alternating between periods of eerie calmness and frenzied activity. But at least he was still here, still my dog. For now, I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air might clear my head. As I stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked me off my feet. The air was thick with an electric charge, making the hair on my arm stand on end. As I made my way down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. Everywhere I looked, I saw dogs. They sat in yards, stood on porches, peered out from behind fences, and every single one of them was staring directly at me. A golden retriever that I recognized as belonging to my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, sat rigidly at the edge of its yard. As I approached, its eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the warm, friendly gaze of a pet. It was ancient, knowing, and utterly alien. "Hello there," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Everything okay, boy?" The dog's mouth opened, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was going to speak. Instead, it let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath my feet. I quickened my pace, trying to put as much distance between myself and the unnatural canines as possible. But no matter how far I went, I could feel their eyes on me, boring into my back with an intensity that left me breathless. By the time I returned home, the storm had intensified. Lightning forked across the sky in intricate patterns that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Each thunderclap shook the house to its foundations, rattling windows and sending books tumbling from shelves. I found Max in the backyard, his head tilted back, howling at the roiling sky above. But this wasn't the typical howl of a dog. It was a sound that no earthly creature should be able to make. It was part canine, yes, but layered beneath that was something else. Something human, and yet not human at all. "Max!" I shouted, trying to make myself heard over the howling wind. "Max, come inside." He turned to look at me, and I stumbled backward in shock. His eyes were glowing with an otherworldly light, pulsing in time with the lightning that illuminated the sky. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the earth, and a bolt of lightning struck so close that I could feel the heat of it on my skin. In the blinding flash, I saw something that made my heart stop. There, standing in the middle of my yard, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form seeming to shift and waver as if it wasn't fully present in our reality. Its head, if you could call it that, was a mass of writhing tentacles, and its body seemed to be composed of angles that hurt my mind to look at directly. I blinked, and it was gone. But the afterimage burned in my vision, a reminder that what I had seen was all too real. "Oh God," I whispered, my legs giving out beneath me. "It's happening. It's really happening." Max padded over to me, his movements fluid and purposeful in a way that was decidedly undog-like. He sat before me, his glowing eyes boring into mine with an intensity that left me breathless. And then, as the storm reached a fever pitch around us, Max opened his mouth and spoke. "It's time," he said, his voice a mixture of canine growl and that ancient eldritch tone that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. "Time for what?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "The stars are right," Max intoned, his voice growing louder to be heard over the howling wind. "The gate opens and they come. You must fulfill your role, Harold. The great old ones await. Lightning struck again, closer this time, and in its flash I saw more figures in my yard. Tall, shambling forms that defied description, their very presence seeming to warp the air around them. "I don't understand," I cried out, tears of fear and frustration streaming down my face. "What am I supposed to do?" Max's form began to shift and change before my eyes. His fur rippled and flowed like water, revealing glimpses of something underneath that was decidedly not canine. When he spoke again, his voice was a chorus of countless alien tongues. "The key is within you, Harold. The symbols on your flesh, the knowledge in your mind. These are the tools with which you will open the way. But beware, for once the gate is opened, it cannot be easily closed." The storm intensified, rain lashing down in sheets that seemed to move against the wind. The very air felt charged with an otherworldly energy, and I could sense something vast and terrible pressing against the boundaries of our reality. "I can't do this," I protested, shaking my head vehemently. "I won't do this. You can't make me." A sound that might have been laughter emanated from Max, but it was a cold, humorless thing that sent shivers down my spine. "Choice is an illusion, little one. You were chosen long ago, your bloodline marked for this very purpose. Resist if you must, but know that your struggles only hasten the inevitable." As if to punctuate his words, the sky split open with a deafening crack. A vortex of swirling energy formed overhead, its center a void of absolute darkness that seemed to drink in all light and sound. The figures in my yard grew more substantial, their forms solidifying as they drew closer. I could hear them now, a cacophony of whispers and screams, of languages long dead, and some that had never existed in our world. "The gate opens," Max growled, his form now barely recognizable as the dog I had once known. "They come, Harold. Will you greet them as a willing servant, or will you cling to your pitiful notion of reality until it is torn from you?" I staggered to my feet, my mind reeling from the impossible choice before me. The storm raged around us, a maelstrom of cosmic forces beyond my comprehension. In the distance, I could hear the howls and barks of countless dogs, all raised in a terrible chorus that heralded the arrival of something ancient and unstoppable. As the vortex in the sky grew larger, I felt a tugging sensation in my very soul. The symbols on my palms began to glow with an eldritch light, pulsing in time with the swirling energies above. "Make your choice, Harold." Max's voice boomed, now indistinguishable from the thunder that shook the earth. "For the old ones wait, and their patience is not infinite." I stood there trembling as the storm reached its cataclysmic peak. The choice before me was impossible, the consequences unimaginable. But as the figures drew ever closer, their alien forms now fully materialized in our world, I knew that my next action would determine not just my fate, but the fate of all humanity. With a deep breath, I raised my hands towards the swirling vortex, the glowing symbols on my palms blazing like twin suns. Whatever came next, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The gathering storm had arrived, and with it, the dawn of a new and terrifying age. The storm had subsided, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. The air felt charged, as if the very molecules were vibrating with anticipation. Max stood at the edge of my property, his form barely recognizable as canine anymore. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and when he moved, it was with a fluid grace that no earthly creature should possess. "Come," he said, his voice a mixture of growl and eldritch whisper. "It is time for the summoning." I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, to wake up from this nightmare. But I knew there was no escaping what was to come. With leaden feet, I followed Max as he led me through deserted streets. The town seemed abandoned, an oppressive silence broken only by the occasional distant howl of a dog. We reached the outskirts of town where abandoned factories and warehouses stood as rusting monuments to better times. Max paused in front of a particularly dilapidated building, its windows dark and broken. "Here," he intoned. "The gate will open here." As we entered the warehouse, The darkness seemed to press in around us, thick and almost tangible. The air was heavy with the scent of mold and decay, but underneath it was something else, an alien odor that made my stomach churn. "What is this place?" I whispered, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast empty space. Max didn't answer. Instead, he led me deeper into the building, towards a faint glow that emanated from somewhere ahead. As we rounded a corner, I saw them. A group of people standing in a perfect circle, their faces blank and their eyes unfocused. I recognized some of them, Mrs. Thompson from down the street, the mailman, even Dr. Blackwood from the university. They stood motionless, swaying slightly as if moved by an unseen wind. "What's wrong with them?" I asked, horror creeping into my voice. "They are the vessels," Max replied, his voice echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space, empty and waiting to be filled with the essence of the old ones. In the center of the circle, the air seemed to shimmer and twist. As I watched, a swirling vortex of energy began to form, pulsing with colors that had no place in our reality. The people in the circle began to chant, their voices a discordant chorus of that same ancient language I had heard Max speak. "Fanglui mglwanaf Cthulhu relie wagahnagl they intoned over and over. "What are they saying?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "In his house at Relie, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming," Max translated, his voice tinged with reverence. "But he will dream no longer. The stars are right, and he shall rise." The vortex grew larger, its swirling energies casting twisted shadows on the walls. And then I heard it. Whispers from the other side. Voices that spoke of impossible geometries and cosmic horrors beyond human comprehension. "Something's coming through," I gasped, taking an involuntary step backward. Max's form began to shift and change, growing larger and more monstrous with each passing moment. "Yes," he growled, his voice now a cacophony of alien tones. "The way is opening. The old ones return to claim what was always theirs." I could see something moving within the vortex, a vast shape that hurt my mind to look at directly. Tentacles writhed and twisted, reaching out towards our world with terrible purpose. "We have to stop this," I cried out, though I had no idea how. "We can't let them through." But even as I spoke, I knew it was too late. The vortex had grown to fill almost the entire warehouse, its swirling energies crackling with eldritch power. The people in the circle began to convulse, their bodies twisting in ways that human bodies were never meant to move. And then, just as the portal reached its peak, Max leaped into its center. His body contorted and expanded, absorbing the otherworldly energies that poured through the gate. "Max, no!" I screamed, reaching out futilely. But the creature that had once been my dog paid no heed. It grew larger and more monstrous with each passing second, its form shifting between states of matter in a way that defied all laws of physics. "Fool," it boomed, its voice shaking the very foundations of the warehouse. "Max is no more. I am the herald, the opener of the way. And through me, the old ones shall enter your world." The vortex pulsed and throbbed, and I could feel the fabric of reality straining around us. The people in the circle began to change, their bodies morphing into horrific hybrid forms, part human, part something else entirely. "This can't be happening," I muttered, backing away until I felt the cold wall against my back. "This has to be a nightmare." But I knew it was all too real. The air was filled with an otherworldly humming, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very atoms of my being. I could feel something vast and terrible pressing against the boundaries of our world, seeking entry. "Behold!" The thing that had been Max roared, its voice now a chorus of countless alien tongues. "The gate is open and they come. Bow before your new gods, mortal, for the age of man is at an end." The vortex exploded outward in a blast of eldritch energy, and I was thrown to the ground. As I struggled to my feet, I saw impossible shapes pouring through the portal, beings of such cosmic horror that my mind recoiled at the sight of them. Tentacles writhed and squirmed, attached to bodies that seemed to exist in more dimensions than our reality could contain. Eyes opened where no eyes should be, gazing upon our world with alien hunger. "What have we done?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face as I witnessed the end of everything I had ever known. The creature that had been Max turned its attention to me, its form now a swirling mass of tentacles and eyes, and things I had no words to describe. "You have fulfilled your purpose, Harold," it intoned. "Now witness the dawning of a new age, as the old ones reclaim their dominion over this pitiful realm." I wanted to run, to hide, to wake up from this cosmic nightmare, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away from the horrors that were pouring into our world. As the last vestiges of reality crumbled around us, I heard the thing that had been Max speak one final time. "Rejoice, mortal," it said, its voice now indistinguishable from the cacophony of alien sounds that filled the air. "For you have been chosen to witness the rebirth of the universe. The stars are right, and the old ones have returned." The warehouse dissolved around us, the walls melting away to reveal a landscape of impossible geometries and colors that had no place in our spectrum. And as I stood there, witness to the end of everything I had ever known, I realized that this was only the beginning. The summoning was complete, and a new age of cosmic horror had dawned. Whatever came next, I knew that the world, and my place in it, would never be the same again. The warehouse had become a nexus of cosmic horror, a place where the laws of physics and reality bent and shattered. At the center of it all stood Max, or what had once been Max. My faithful companion, my link to normality in this descent into madness, was transforming before my eyes into something that defied comprehension. I watched, paralyzed with terror, as Max's body began to change. His fur rippled and fell away in clumps, revealing skin that shifted and bubbled like boiling tar. His limbs elongated, bones cracking and reforming with sickening sounds that echoed through the cavernous space. "Max!" I cried out, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of otherworldly energy swirling around us. "Max, please, fight it." But if any part of my dog remained within that metamorphosing form, it gave no sign. The creature's body continued to grow, expanding in ways that hurt my mind to perceive. Tentacles erupted from its flanks, writhing and reaching towards the sky. Its head split and reformed, eyes blossoming across its surface like malignant flowers. Around us, the circle of people who had been part of the ritual began to collapse. One by one, they crumpled to the ground, their bodies withering as if ages were passing in moments. I watched in horror as Mrs. Thompson, my kindly neighbor, aged decades in seconds before turning to dust. "What's happening to them?" I shouted, though I wasn't sure if I was addressing Max, the cosmic forces at work, or my own fractured sanity. A voice that was no longer Max's, no longer anything remotely canine or even earthly, boomed in response. "They serve their purpose," it intoned, the words seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Their life force feeds the transformation, bridges the gap between your pitiful reality and the true nature of the cosmos." As the last of the ritual participants crumbled away, Max's transformation neared its completion. The being before me now bore no resemblance to the loyal dog I had known. It towered above me, its form a shifting mass of tentacles, eyes, and structures I had no words to describe. With dawning horror, I began to recognize elements of the creature from the ancient prophecies Max had spoken in those early, terrifying days. The squamous flesh and manifold eyes, mentioned in hushed whispers by long-dead cultists, were now horrifically realized before me. "E! E!" the creature roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the warehouse. "Cthulhu Ftang! The stars are right, and the old ones rise." As it spoke, more of its body continued to change and shift. Wings unfurled from its back, not feathered or leathery, but composed of some strange, semi-transparent substance that seemed to bend light around it. Its lower body merged with the floor, spreading out in a mass of writhing tendrils that began to consume the very structure of the building. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling as I tried to process the impossible being before me. This was beyond anything I had imagined, beyond any nightmare my human mind could have conjured. The This was truly alien, a glimpse into the horrifying reality that lurked just beyond the veil of our limited perception. The creature that had once been Max turned its attention fully to me. Countless eyes ranging from pinpricks to massive orbs larger than my head focused on my trembling form. In those eyes, I saw knowledge. Vast, terrible, cosmic knowledge that no mortal mind was meant to comprehend. "Behold, Harold," the being spoke, its voice now a chorus of 1,000 alien tongues. "Witness the true form of your masters, the great old ones who slumbered beneath the waves and beyond the stars. Your pitiful world trembles on the brink of a new age." I wanted to run, to flee from this cosmic horror that threatened to shatter my sanity. But my legs wouldn't move. I stood rooted to the spot, my eyes unable to tear themselves away from the monstrous form before me. What are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice a pathetic whisper in the face of such cosmic terror. The creature's laughter was like the grinding of tectonic plates, deep and earth-shaking. "We are the Old Ones," it boomed. "We are those who ruled this planet aeons before your kind crawled from the primordial ooze. We are your gods, your devils, your deepest fears given form. And now, we have returned to claim what was always ours." As it spoke, more changes rippled across its body. Structures that resembled ancient, alien architecture began to sprout from its flesh. I recognized elements from the visions and prophecies, Cyclopean cities, non-Euclidean geometries, and symbols that hurt my eyes to look upon. "The transformation is complete," the entity declared. "The gate is open, and the way is clear for our brethren to enter your realm. You have served your purpose well, Harold. Now, witness the dawning of a new age." Terror finally broke through my paralysis. I turned to flee, my feet slipping on the ichor-slicked floor of the warehouse. But as I moved, I felt a pressure building in my head, a pain so intense it threatened to split my skull. "You cannot escape your destiny," the creature's voice boomed inside my mind. "You are bound to us now, Harold. Your flesh, your very soul, belongs to the Old Ones." The pain intensified, and I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The world around me began to warp and twist, reality itself seeming to unravel at the seams. The last thing I saw before consciousness fled was the massive, tentacled form of the being that had once been Max, reaching towards me with appendages that defied description. "Welcome," it intoned, "to the true nature of reality." And then, mercifully, the world went black. I plunged into unconsciousness, unaware of the cosmic horrors that were even now pouring into our dimension, reshaping the very fabric of existence. As darkness claimed me, one final thought echoed through my mind. Nothing would ever be the same again. The transformation was complete, and with it, the world as I knew it had ended. Whatever awaited me on the other side of this darkness, I knew it would be beyond anything my human mind could comprehend. The first sensation I experienced upon regaining consciousness was a profound sense of wrongness. Every atom of my being screamed that I didn't belong here, wherever here was. I opened my eyes, blinking rapidly as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. The sky above me was a roiling mass of colors that had no place in any earthly spectrum. Purples deeper than the heart of an amethyst, swirled with greens so vibrant they hurt to look at directly. Streaks of a color I had no name for cut across the chaotic canvas, pulsing in time with some alien rhythm. I pushed myself up, my hands sinking into ground that felt simultaneously spongy and crystalline. The landscape around me defied description, a nightmare fusion of organic and inorganic forms. Structures that might have been plants swayed in a non-existent breeze, their leaves composed of what looked like living metal. "Where am I?" I whispered, my voice sounding flat and lifeless in the alien atmosphere. As if in response to my question, a creature shuffled into view. I recoiled in horror, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It had the general shape of a dog, but that's where any resemblance to a canine ended. Its skin was a patchwork of scales, fur, and something that looked unsettlingly like human flesh. Multiple eyes blinked independently across its misshapen head, and tentacles writhed where its tail should have been. With a jolt of recognition, I realized this thing bore a haunting resemblance to Mrs. Thompson's golden retriever, the same dog that had stared at me with such alien intelligence on that fateful day. "Oh, God," I choked out, scrambling backward. "What happened to you?" The creature tilted its head, regarding me with eyes that held an unsettling glimmer of recognition. When it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged was a grotesque parody of a bark, layered with whispers in that same eldritch language I had heard during the summoning. More of these transformed dogs began to appear, each more horrifying than the last. I recognized elements of the pets from my neighborhood in their twisted forms. Mr. Johnson's corgi, now a writhing mass of eyes and mouths, the Henderson's German shepherd, its body elongated and segmented like some cosmic centipede. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but a strange calm settled over my mind. Something deep within me, perhaps the part that had made me the herald, knew that I had a purpose here. My gaze was drawn to the horizon, where a massive structure loomed against the impossible sky. It was a building, if such a mundane term could be applied to something so alien. Its architecture defied Euclidean geometry, angles bending in ways that hurt my mind to look at directly. The entire structure pulsed with an eldritch energy, waves of power radiating outward in visible ripples. "I have to go there," I murmured, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "That's where it all comes together." As I began to make my way across the bizarre terrain, the transformed dogs fell into step behind me. They moved with an eerie synchronicity, as if guided by some greater intelligence. The ground beneath my feet shifted and reformed with each step, sometimes solid, sometimes liquid, always wrong. As I walked, fragments of knowledge began to coalesce in my mind. The true nature of the prophecy, my role as the herald, the cosmic forces at play, it all started to make a terrible kind of sense. "We were never the masters," I said aloud, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Humanity was just a placeholder, keeping things ready for their return." One of the dog things made a sound that might have been agreement, might have been mocking laughter. I pressed on, drawn inexorably towards the pulsing structure in the distance. The journey seemed to take hours, or perhaps only moments. Time had little meaning in this place between realities. As I drew closer to the structure, I began to make out more details. What I had initially taken for walls were actually masses of writhing tentacles, pulsing and shifting in patterns too complex for my human mind to comprehend. At the base of the structure stood a figure that dwarfed everything around it. My heart clenched with a mixture of recognition and terror. It was the being that had once been Max, now fully transformed into a towering amalgamation of dog and cosmic horror. Its body was a mountain of flesh, fur, and elements I had no words to describe. Tentacles the size of redwoods writhed from its flanks, and eyes larger than lakes blinked in disconcerting patterns across its surface. When it spoke, the very fabric of this alien reality trembled. "Welcome, Herald," it boomed, its voice a cacophony of barks, growls, and eldritch whispers. "You have crossed the threshold and embraced your true purpose." I stood before this cosmic monstrosity, feeling simultaneously insignificant and pivotal. "Max," I said, my voice barely a whisper. What happens now?" The being that had once been my loyal companion regarded me with eyes that held the knowledge of eons. "Now," it intoned, "you fulfill your destiny. The gate is open, the way is clear. You will be the bridge between worlds, the catalyst for the great merging." As it spoke, I felt something stirring within me. The symbols on my palms began to glow with an otherworldly light, pulsing in time with the energies that swirled around us. "I don't understand," I said, even as a part of me realized that I did, on some fundamental level beyond conscious thought. "Understanding is not required," the Max thing replied. only acceptance. You are the herald, the opener of ways. Through you, the old ones will fully enter your reality, reshaping it in their image. I looked down at my hands, watching as the glowing symbols began to spread up my arms. And if I refuse? I asked, already knowing the answer. The cosmic entity's laughter shook the very foundations of this alien realm. Refusal is not an option, little herald. You are merely the instrument through which cosmic will is enacted. Embrace your role, for in doing so you will witness the birth of a new universe. As if in response to its words, the structure behind the Max thing began to pulse more intensely. I could feel the energy building, a cosmic pressure that threatened to tear reality apart at the seams. It's time, the entity declared. Step forward, herald, and fulfill your destiny. With each step I took towards the writhing mass of tentacles and impossible geometries, I felt my humanity slipping away. Knowledge of cosmic truths flooded my mind, threatening to overwhelm my sanity. As I reached out to touch the pulsing structure, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in one of its shimmering surfaces. My eyes glowed with the same eldritch light as the symbols on my skin, and my form was beginning to twist and change in ways that defied description. And so it begins. The Max thing intoned as my hand made contact with the alien surface. In that moment, I felt the barriers between worlds shatter. Reality itself seemed to scream as the old ones began to pour through the gap I had created. As my consciousness expanded to encompass the vastness of the cosmos, one final human thought flitted through my mind. What have I done? But it was too late for regrets or second thoughts. The transformation was complete. The merger of worlds had begun, and I, the herald, stood at the center of it all, a conduit for forces beyond mortal comprehension. The universe as I had known it was ending, and a new, terrifying reality was being born. The cosmic energies swirled around me, reality itself bending and warping in ways that defied comprehension. The being that had once been Max, now a towering amalgamation of eldritch horror and canine familiarity, loomed over me. Its voice, when it spoke, resonated not just in my ears but through every fiber of my being. Herald, it intoned, the word carrying the weight of eons. The moment of choice is upon you. I struggled to focus, my mind reeling from the cosmic knowledge that had been flooding into it. Choice? I managed to ask, my own voice sounding alien to my ears. The creature's countless eyes fixed upon me, each one a swirling vortex of otherworldly intelligence. You stand at the nexus of realities, the fulcrum upon which the fate of worlds balances. In you lies the power to save or doom not just your realm, but ours as well. As it spoke, I felt a splitting sensation, as if my consciousness was being torn in two. Visions flooded my mind, overwhelming in their clarity and terror. In one, I saw our world transformed. The familiar cityscapes of humanity were warped and twisted, buildings merged with writhing organic matter. The sky was a roiling mass of tentacles and impossible colors. Humans, or what was left of them, scurried like insects among the towering forms of the old ones. It was a world of cosmic horror made manifest, where the laws of physics were mere suggestions, and madness was the only sane response. This, the creature's voice echoed in my mind, is one potential future. The complete merger of our realms, where the old ones rule supreme and reality bends to their will. The vision shifted, and I saw another possibility. Our world, seemingly untouched by the cosmic horrors I had witnessed. People went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the terrors that had nearly befallen them. But as I looked closer, I saw the cracks in this facade of normalcy. Shadows moved in impossible ways, and in quiet moments people's eyes flickered with an otherworldly awareness. It was a world forever changed, living under the constant threat of the veil tearing once more. And this, the being continued, is the alternative. A world where the incursion is halted, but the knowledge remains. A reality forever scarred by the touch of the cosmic. I gasped as the visions receded, leaving me dizzy and disoriented. Why? I demanded, my voice cracking with the strain of cosmic awareness. Why me? Why this choice? The creature that had been Max shifted its massive form, tentacles writhing in patterns too complex for my human mind to fully grasp. You have been prepared for this moment across countless lifetimes, Harold. In every iteration, every turn of the cosmic wheel, we have guided you to this nexus. Memories flooded my mind, not just of this life, but of others. I saw myself in different times, different places, always with a loyal canine companion by my side, always being led, unknowingly, to this moment of cosmic significance. You were Max in every life? I asked, the realization dawning with horrifying clarity. The being's laughter shook the very fabric of reality around us. Max, and so much more. We are the guardians of the threshold, the keepers of the cosmic balance. And you, little Harold, are the key that can lock or unlock the gates between worlds. I struggled to process this information, my mind threatening to fracture under the weight of cosmic truth. But why offer a choice at all? Why not simply take what you want? Because balance must be maintained, the creature replied, its voice taking on a somber tone. The merger of realms is not to be undertaken lightly. The old ones hunger for dominion, yes, but even they understand the necessity of choice. Free will, as limited as it may be, is a force unto itself in the cosmic equation. I looked down at my hands, watching as symbols of eldritch power crawled across my skin. And if I choose to stop this, to close the gate, then you doom our realm to a slow death, the being said. The old ones will slumber once more, and the cosmic energies that sustain our reality will gradually fade. But your world will continue, forever changed but largely intact. And if I allow the merger to continue, the creature's form pulsed with barely contained power. Then two worlds become one, a new reality, terrible and beautiful in its cosmic scope. Humanity as you know it will cease to exist, but a new form of existence will take its place. You will ascend, becoming one with the old ones, your consciousness expanding to encompass the vastness of the universe. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself amidst the swirling chaos of cosmic forces. The weight of the decision pressed down upon me, threatening to crush my very soul. How can I possibly make this choice? I whispered, more to myself than to the eldritch being before me. You must, the creature replied, its voice surprisingly gentle. For in your choice lies the fate of two worlds. Trust in the knowledge we have imparted to you across your many lives. Look beyond the limited scope of human morality and embrace the cosmic truth. I took a deep breath, opening my eyes to gaze upon the swirling, impossible landscape around me. In that moment, I felt the full weight of my role as herald. I was no longer just a person, but a cosmic fulcrum, the linchpin upon which realities turned. If I choose to allow the merger, I said slowly, what becomes of me? The being's form shifted, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the loyal dog I had known. You become more than you can possibly imagine. Your consciousness will expand to encompass the cosmos. You will know the joy of creation and the terror of the void. You will be both everything and nothing. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. And if I choose to close the gate? Then you return to your world, forever changed. You will bear the knowledge of cosmic truths, a solitary guardian against future incursions. Your life will be long but lonely, as you watch over a world that can never truly understand what almost was. The choice loomed before me, two paths diverging into futures I could barely comprehend. On one hand, the complete transformation of our world, the birth of a new cosmic reality. On the other, the preservation of humanity, but at the cost of an entire alien realm. I closed my eyes, reaching deep within myself, drawing upon the cosmic knowledge that had been imparted to me across countless lifetimes. In that moment, I saw the intricate web of cause and effect that had led to this point. the delicate balance of forces that shaped the universe. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I had to do. "I've made my choice," I said, my voice steady despite the enormity of the decision. The being that had been Max leaned forward, its myriad eyes focused intently upon me. "Speak, Harold. Shape the fate of worlds with your words." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of two realities hanging upon my next words. Whatever I chose, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The cosmic scales trembled, awaiting the decision that would tip them one way or the other. With clarity born of cosmic insight and human compassion, I made my choice, my words echoing across the vast expanse of realities. "I choose." I gasped, my eyes flying open as I jolted upright in my worn leather armchair. My heart was pounding, and a thin sheen of sweat covered my body. For a moment I sat there disoriented, my mind reeling from the vivid cosmic horrors I had just experienced. "A dream," I muttered, running a trembling hand through my hair. It was all just a dream. At my feet, Max stirred, raising his head to look at me with sleepy eyes. The sight of him, normal and dog-like, sent a wave of relief washing over me. I leaned forward, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "You wouldn't believe the nightmare I just had." As I moved my hand, something caught my eye. There, etched into the palm of my right hand, was a symbol I had never seen before. It was an intricate design, reminiscent of the eldritch markings I had seen in my dream vision. The lines seemed to shimmer slightly, as if they weren't quite part of our reality. "What the hell?" I whispered, turning my hand this way and that, examining the mark from different angles. Max whined softly, drawing my attention back to him. As our eyes met, I felt a jolt of recognition. There, in the depths of his canine gaze, I saw a glimmer of something more, a flicker of cosmic awareness that mirrored my own. "Oh God," I breathed, memories flooding back. "It wasn't a dream, was it, Max?" In response, Max stood and stretched, his movements seeming just a bit too fluid, too purposeful for a normal dog. He padded over to the front door and sat, looking back at me expectantly. With a sense of trepidation, I rose from my chair and made my way to the door. My hand hesitated on the doorknob, a part of me afraid of what I might find outside. But the choice had been made, and there was no going back now. I opened the door and stepped out onto my front porch. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my quiet suburban street. Mrs. Thompson was watering her flowers, and the Henderson kids were playing basketball in their driveway. But as I looked closer, I began to notice subtle differences. The colors seemed just a bit off, as if the entire world had been shifted slightly on the spectrum. Shadows moved in ways that didn't quite match the objects casting them. And when I looked at my neighbors, I could see something lurking just behind their eyes. A hint of awareness, of cosmic knowledge that hadn't been there before. "What have I done?" I murmured, gripping the porch railing for support. Max brushed against my leg, a comforting presence in this subtly altered world. I looked down at him, seeing both my loyal companion and the cosmic entity he truly was. "We should take a walk," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "See what's changed." As we made our way down the street, the strangeness of our new reality became more apparent. Plants seemed to move of their own accord, their leaves reaching out as if trying to grasp passing insects. The sky above was a swirl of colors that shouldn't have been possible at sunset, hues that hinted at the vast cosmic forces now barely contained behind the veil of normalcy. We passed Mrs. Thompson, still watering her flowers. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" she called out, her voice carrying an undercurrent of something else. "It certainly is," I replied, forcing a smile. "Your flowers are looking particularly vibrant." As I spoke, I noticed that her flowers were indeed vibrant, almost unnaturally so. Their petals seemed to pulse with an inner light, and I could have sworn I saw faces forming and dissolving in their centers. Mrs. Thompson smiled, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something ancient and alien in her eyes. "They do love this new atmosphere," she said, emphasizing the last word in a way that sent shivers down my spine. We continued our walk, passing by other neighbors who all seemed to be going about their normal routines. But each interaction was tinged with an undercurrent of cosmic awareness. A knowing look here, a too fluid movement there. It was as if the entire neighborhood was engaged in an elaborate charade of normalcy, all while being acutely aware of the vast, terrible truths that lay just beyond our perception. As we reached the park at the end of our street, the sun had nearly set. The playground equipment cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to move independently of the fading light. I sat on a bench, Max settling at my feet, and tried to process everything I was seeing and feeling. "I chose this," I said softly, more to myself than to Max. "I chose to close the gate, to preserve our world. But at what cost?" Max looked up at me, his eyes swirling with cosmic intelligence. For a moment, I thought I heard his voice in my mind, echoing with the weight of eons. "The cost is knowledge, Harold. The veil has been thinned, and humanity will never be the same." I nodded, understanding on a level that went beyond mere human comprehension. We had averted the full merging of realities, the complete dominion of the old ones. But in doing so, we had forever changed the nature of our world. The cosmic truths I had glimpsed were now a part of our reality, seeping into the collective unconscious of humanity. As twilight deepened into night, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a howl, distant but clear, that was neither fully dog nor human. It echoed across the darkening sky, carrying with it hints of cosmic longing and eldritch knowledge. Other dogs in the neighborhood began to respond, their howls harmonizing in ways that no earthly canine chorus should. The sound grew, swelling into a cacophony that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of reality. I stood feeling a pull towards something. The symbol on my palm began to glow faintly, pulsing in time with the otherworldly howls. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" I asked Max, already knowing the answer. He looked up at me, his form momentarily flickering between loyal dog and cosmic entity. In that moment, I understood the enormity of what lay ahead. I was the herald, the one who had made the choice to preserve our world while allowing the cosmic to seep through. It would be my responsibility to navigate this new reality, to stand as a guardian between the human and the eldritch. As we made our way back home through the eerily altered landscape of our neighborhood, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. The world had changed, subtly but irrevocably, and I with it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever cosmic horrors might still threaten to break through the thinned veil, I knew that I would face them. For I was the herald, the keeper of cosmic secrets, the bridge between realities. And as the last light of day faded, giving way to a night filled with impossible stars and the echoes of eldritch howls, I knew that my journey had only just begun.